Good Friday morning. I'm Chris Jansing. In the midst of a politically tense environment where everything is a tough fight, Susan Rice decided it wasn't worth one more. With no deal to stop the fiscal cliff and multiple bruising battles on the horizon, the ambassador to the UN didn't want to risk hurting the president, so she withdrew her name for consideration for Secretary of State.
Did you want the job?
I would have been very honored to serve in that job, just as I'm delighted to do what I'm doing. But yes, sure. How can you not want to, if in my field, serve at the highest possible level?
Rice has been a close confidant of the president since he was elected to the Senate. She supported him over Hillary Clinton for president, even though she worked for the Clinton administration. And the New York Times reports in the beginning, she spent untold hours advising him without pay. The president defended her to the end. She is likely to get another big job in the future when there's an opening, and he is meeting with her later today. Here's what he said in a local interview with station KCRA.
I hadn't made a decision about who would be my next Secretary of State. There's no doubt that Susan was qualified. There are other people who are qualified as well. Her interest is in serving me, but most importantly, serving the country. And she's done an outstanding job. I could not be prouder with her. She will continue to be one of the top members of my national security team.
I want to bring in the political reporter for The Atlantic, Molly Ball, and David Drucker, associate politics editor for Roll Call. Good morning.
Good morning.
Molly, was there really any other way she could have played this, do you think?
Well, I think we can see from the fact that she's talking about it gracefully and accepting it and indeed offered herself to pull out, that she's not kicking and screaming. She's not being forced against her will. However, it doesn't seem as if the administration really fought her when she took the initiative to pull her name out of contention. It seems like this was a fight that neither side wanted to have, really. Madam
Wright told the New York Times, David, she is incredibly bright, but lots of people in Washington are bright. What separates people out here is that some are loyal. You think it still had a sting for the president? And if it did, what are the implications of that for his relationship with the Republicans?
Well, look, I think the president has much bigger fish to fry and fights looming with the Republicans, and so I don't really think this becomes a lasting issue. I think that at the end of the day, the administration probably didn't think it was helpful to have a bruising nomination fight where Benghazi and Libya was going to be litigated day after day at some future point, which would probably consume a lot of television and news time. And I think that if that wasn't the case, if we were just talking about some tough questioning, she wouldn't have withdrawn. The administration would have made it clear, you're not going to withdraw. We don't want that. But there are just so many priorities and tough political battles ahead, and a sort of uncertain economy. This was something that probably both sides, but I do think the White House deemed as unnecessary.
Well, the whole thing started really sort of this uproar over her on part of a few Republicans with the appearances on the Sunday shows, and Brian Williams asked Susan Rice about that.
Why was it you that Sunday morning, of all the people in government, why the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations answering questions about the attack in Benghazi?
Wasn't that unusual? I've done Sunday shows many times in the past. Secretary Clinton had originally been asked by most of the networks to go on. She had had an incredibly grueling week dealing with the protests around the Middle East and North Africa that had enveloped our embassies. She had to deal with the loss of our 4 colleagues in Benghazi and console the whole State Department, greet the families and the bodies, and she declined to do it. And I was asked by the White House if I would do it as the next senior American diplomat.
Would this, Molly, do you think, have been a whole different thing if Hillary Clinton had done those shows that day, or would there still have been a fight over Susan Rice?
You know, we can't know. It's impossible to know if something else would have come up and she would have found herself answering for this controversy in other ways. I mean, I do think that we saw when Susan Rice went to Capitol Hill and attempted to make peace not only with the senators who seemed set against her, like John McCain, but senators who seemed more open to considering her, like Susan Collins. That sort of diplomatic effort failed. She was not able to smooth things over with them, and I think that was regarded by the administration as a bad sign for any potential nomination fight as well.
All indications are, David, to follow up on what we were talking about, that the White House and the president are upset over Susan Rice. Stephanie Cutter was on Morning Joe this morning. She said she's angry about the way that Susan Rice was treated. And in fact, one article described it as lingering bitterness. And I guess the very real question is, while this does remove one fight in the middle of the other fight, are these lingering feelings likely to get in the way of what has to happen now?
I don't think so. I think that there's enough going on to stir people up that I think this is really just a drop in the bucket. I mean, look, I know people are upset, you know, in the White House on the Democratic side about how Susan Rice was treated. But if she's going to be the next Secretary of State, she can't argue that, look, I just went on the Sunday shows and said what people told me to say. I mean, either you're in the loop and you're a senior part of the team who's responsible for what you're saying, or you're not. And, you know, this is the consequence of something that didn't go well. It may not ultimately be her fault, but you can't have it both ways. And for a position like Secretary of State, she would have been subjected to pretty tough questioning anyway, but this became a politically untenable situation for the White House. But they're going to move on, and you know, I firmly believe that whatever tension is going to continue to exist, which we know it will, between Republicans on the Hill and the White House, Democrats and Republicans on the Hill, it's going to be about far bigger things than this. That whoever's nominated for Secretary of State is going to face a lot of tough questions about administration policy, but will most likely ultimately be confirmed relatively easily. But because of the role she played in the Benghazi situation, this was just not going to be the case for her. She might have squeaked in, but it was going to be rough.
I want to bring in Congressman Tom Cole, a Republican from Oklahoma. Good to see you again, Congressman. Good morning.
Good to see you, Chris.
What happened with Susan Rice? Do you think that it is adding to, alleviating some of the tension that clearly is going on between some Democrats and Republicans over the fiscal cliff, or has no impact at all?
Well, frankly, I don't, obviously I don't know if it was Ambassador Rice's decision or the administration's decision, but it was a smart decision, frankly. I think, as has been suggested earlier, she was going to have a pretty rough and tough nomination process, confirmation process, and that's a fight the president doesn't need right now. It would have been a distraction, and in the end of the day, does he get credit for
that? Does she get credit for that? Do you say, okay, there's a concession that's been made here?
Well, I don't think that has much to do with the fiscal cliff, and I'm sure that the president did not want to make this move or have this made. But again, you can only fight so many battles. He's got a lot of other fights that are coming. This was one he didn't need. He actually needs, I think, and the country would be best served by somebody that is a unifying figure and can sidestep some of these difficult issues. So again, it's unfortunate for the individuals involved, but it's a smart and frankly very clear-eyed decision, I think, by the White House.
Well, let me tell you what the president had to say about the ongoing fiscal cliff negotiations in an interview with a local Minnesota station. I'm going to quote the president here. I think Speaker Boehner has a contentious caucus, as his caucus is tough on him sometimes, so he doesn't want to look like he's giving in to me somehow, because that might hurt him in his own caucus. Is the hard right of your party, a hard right of your caucus, still resistant to revenue at all, raising taxes on the rich?
Again, remember, the revenue, the taxes go up at the end of the month, and that's not something, that's current law. That's not something that by digging in and holding on we can prevent. If we could, we certainly would, because none of us favor tax rate increases, period. Having said that, again, I think Speaker Boehner leads this caucus. He's not led by this caucus, and this caucus supports him tremendously. He's in a very strong position right now. I think people think he led us through a very difficult and contentious election. They think he'll back at some of the tough decisions he made in the budget negotiations and the debt ceiling negotiations. I think he's been vindicated in those decisions. So again, you've got a very united leadership. They've got every name on the line on the Republican proposal. So I think actually the Speaker's negotiating from a position of strength, but there are limits, obviously, just given the fact that taxes head up for all Americans at the end of the month. So there's also some leverage on the Democratic side.
Well, there is also a report from the Congressional Research Service, Congressman. It found there is no conclusive evidence between tax cuts and economic expansion.
Well, you know, you can find plenty of economists that would quarrel and disagree with that, and there's about as many opinions on these kinds of things as there are economists. But look, nobody elects Republicans to raise taxes. It's just something that most Republicans instinctively don't want to do. So it's I never met one who actually ran for office and said, I'm running in order to raise taxes. So, you know, I think you would be surprised if the Republicans were anything other than totally resistant to this. On the other hand, I've never met very many Democrats that want to cut spending, and that's the real issue here. You know, revenue is on the table. The speakers put it there. We haven't seen anything serious from the president in terms of spending cuts and entitlement reform.
Congressman Tom Cole, thank you very much. Good to see you again. Molly, the president and John Boehner met at the White House yesterday. We heard that the meeting was, I think the word that was used was frank. And yet again, the lines of communication remain open. That's a statement they put out as they did the last time, except John Boehner's going home to Ohio this weekend. Is that a bad sign? Is that unexpected? What's going on?
We don't know much about. I think the only word, literally one word, out of those that conversation yesterday was that word frank. It's a good sign that they're talking. I don't think this is Boehner taking his ball and going home. There's still some cautious optimism, really on both sides, especially on the Democratic side. But as you heard the congressman saying, and he's been saying this for a couple weeks now, Congressman Cole, Republicans are coming around to this idea that they're going to have to give on those rates. They are going to want something in return if there's going to be a deal. But if there is, I think Boehner's going to have the votes to get something through.
They've known about this for a year, and I'm talking about both sides, obviously, David. We're now 18 days away. You could argue even less. Most people are back in their districts, which is Boehner among them. I thought it was interesting that Senator Olympia Snowe told the Washington Post that it's bizarre. It's truly bizarre. There's no sense of urgency. Do you sense any concern by members of Congress about the optics of all this? I mean, I can just say anecdotally that people say, I don't understand, why aren't they getting this done? Why is the Speaker going home? Why are members of Congress going home? And you have some members of Congress complaining that they're totally out of the loop anyway.
Well, look, until there's the framework of a deal to discuss, there's nothing for members of Congress to do here other than other orders of business. Look, I would say two things. Number one, there is concern. I talked to members this week who are aware that everybody's taxes could go up on January 1st, will go up if nothing's done, and that does trouble them. But to your question about urgency, I don't sense actually a whole lot of urgency because there is not yet a fear that so-called going over the cliff, heading into January without a deal, is going to cause some immediate fiscal calamity that's going to send the economy into a tailspin. I think if people actually believe that that would happen rather immediately, there might be more urgency. So people still believe on both sides of the aisle that a bad deal is worse than no deal.
Molly, do you sense any urgency at all?
No, but this is Congress. They don't do anything until their backs are against the wall. They don't do anything until the deadline is right in front of their faces and strikes the fear of God into them. So unfortunately, I don't think we should be surprised. And frankly, I'm a bit of a procrastinator myself. I don't get things done until that deadline's staring me in the face.
Well, we're glad you show up here on time. Molly Ball, thank you very much. David Drucker, have a good weekend.
You too.